Part 1. When the doctors at the private wing of St. Aurora's hospital told billionaire Armen Volkov that his daughter had 3 months to live, he didn't cry. He signed papers. He transferred funds. He authorized experimental trials, private flights for specialists, and discreet consultations with names so famous they rarely left their research towers. He spoke in numbers and timelines. Survival percentages, dosage adjustments, projected declines. But when the final meeting ended and the white-coated experts quietly filed out, the silence that remained was louder than any prognosis. 3 months. 17 years condensed into 90 days. Alina Volkov had once been the pulse of the Volkov estate. Laughter echoing through marble corridors, piano melodies floating down staircases, barefoot sprints across polished floors despite constant reprimands from staff. She had inherited her mother's softness and her father's stubborn fire. Now she lay in a sunlit room at the top of the mansion overlooking the sea, a view she used to love. The curtains were kept half drawn to shield her eyes from brightness that triggered headaches. Machines hummed beside her bed, their steady beeping both comfort and threat. Clear fluid dripped slowly through an IV line into her thin wrist. Stage 4 lymphoma. Aggressive. Resistant to first-line therapy. Unpredictable. Armen had memorized the words like scripture. He spent evenings standing by the panoramic glass wall in his study, staring out at the horizon where ocean met sky. He had built empires from nothing but instinct and ruthlessness. He had crushed competitors twice his size. He had turned debt into dominance. But he could not negotiate with disease. The mansion changed almost overnight. Conversations were whispers. Footsteps softened. Staff avoided eye contact with their employer. The grand dining hall, once host to ministers and magnates, sat unused. Fresh flowers arrived daily, though Alina rarely opened her eyes long enough to admire them. Armen moved through his own home like a stranger. He reviewed medical charts with cold focus, but avoided sitting beside her bed longer than necessary. It wasn't indifference, it was terror. Seeing her small and fragile made something inside him crack, and he did not know how to function in pieces. The new maid arrived during this quiet collapse. Her name was Mira. She came through a reputable agency after 2 longtime staff members requested leave, unable to handle the emotional weight of the household. Mira's file described her as discreet, efficient, and exceptionally detail-oriented. She was smaller than Armen expected when he briefly glanced at her during her introduction. Dark hair pulled into a simple knot. No jewelry, no perfume, her uniform perfectly pressed but modest. Her eyes, however, were observant, not curious in a gossiping way, but measuring. The head housekeeper, Elena, pulled her aside on the first morning. "You are not here to form attachments," Elena said sternly. "Miss Alina is ill. Mr. Volkov prefers minimal interaction. Keep the room clean, replace flowers, assist nurses if asked." Nothing more. Mira nodded without argument, but as she stepped into Alina's room for the first time, she felt something tighten in her chest. The girl in the bed did not look terminal. She looked exhausted. There was a difference. Alina's skin was pale but not waxen. Her breathing was steady. Her hair, though thinning, had not fallen out completely, unusual for late-stage chemotherapy. Her eyes opened briefly when Mira adjusted the vase of white lilies. "You're new," Alina murmured. "Yes," Mira replied gently, smoothing the bedsheet. "You'll get used to the machines," the girl said faintly. "They sound louder at night." Mira offered a soft smile. "I imagine they do." Alina studied her face for a moment. "Don't memorize me. I won't be here long." The words were spoken with eerie calm, as if rehearsed. "Who told you that?" Mira asked carefully. "The doctors." A pause. "Papa believes them. He doesn't say it, but I see it." Mira didn't respond. She focused instead on small tasks, adjusting the curtain angle, straightening the IV tubing. And that was when she noticed the first inconsistency. The medication chart clipped to the IV stand listed a drug she knew by heart. Tacrolimus. Her fingers stilled. Tacrolimus was not standard for lymphoma. It was a powerful immunosuppressant typically prescribed after organ transplants to prevent rejection. In cancer patients, in rare cases, it might be used to manage autoimmune complications, but not in high continuous doses. And certainly not alongside aggressive chemotherapy. Mira said nothing. That evening, she observed the night nurse administering injections. The nurse moved quickly, almost too quickly, switching syringes with practiced efficiency. Alina's pulse monitor would spike slightly after each injection. Within hours, her fatigue deepened. Mira's mind began reconstructing patterns. Years ago, before her career imploded, she had specialized in clinical pharmacology. She had spent a decade studying drug interactions, dosage thresholds, metabolic responses. She had testified in regulatory hearings about medication safety, until she refused to falsify a trial report for a pharmaceutical sponsor. The fallout had been swift and brutal. Her license suspended pending investigation. Legal fees drained her savings. Reputation dismantled by headlines that implied incompetence instead of integrity. She had taken whatever work she could find, including housekeeping, but knowledge does not disappear when titles do. Over the next week, Mira watched quietly. She noted the times of administration. She discreetly photographed vial labels when disposing of medical packaging. She compared dosages mentally with established oncology protocols she remembered vividly. Nothing aligned. Alina's bloodwork reports, left briefly on a tray one afternoon, showed white blood cell counts dangerously low, lower than typical for her supposed stage. Too low. It wasn't cancer driving her immune system into collapse. It was suppression. One afternoon, when the nurse stepped out to answer a call, Mira leaned closer to Alina. "Do you feel worse after certain injections?" she asked softly. Alina hesitated, then nodded faintly. "The clear ones. They make everything heavy. Has anyone explained what they are?" "No. Papa says not to worry about details." Mira's stomach tightened. She began paying attention beyond the bedroom. While dusting Armin's study shelves, she noticed a folder partially tucked behind financial reports. It bore the logo of Volkov Industries' legal division. Inside were trust documents. 2 months prior, around the same time Alina's condition had allegedly worsened dramatically, Armin had restructured company control. Majority shares placed into a trust with a conditional clause. If Alina reached 18, ownership transferred to her fully. If she passed before that date, control reverted entirely to Armin. Mira's pulse quickened. On the surface, it seemed logical, protective even. But in corporate warfare, timing is everything. She remembered reading about tensions within Volkov Industries. A powerful business partner recently pushed out of strategic decisions. Public disagreements masked as creative differences. If Alina died, Armin would be emotionally shattered. Vulnerable. Perhaps willing to sell portions of the company. Perhaps pressured into deals. Or, worse, perhaps someone was manipulating both father and daughter. Mira considered the unthinkable possibility that Armin himself was complicit. But each evening, she saw him stand by the window outside Alina's room, unable to step fully inside. She saw the way his hand trembled when signing additional medical authorizations. She heard him once, very late at night, whisper through the partially open door. "I would trade everything." That did not sound like a man orchestrating his child's death. It sounded like a man being deceived. Still, she needed proof. Mira accessed the medical waste logs stored in the service wing. She cross-referenced disposal counts with prescribed treatments. The numbers did not match. There were more immunosuppressant vials discarded than documented, which meant off-record administration. Her breath grew shallow as the truth assembled itself piece by piece. Alina was not dying from untreatable cancer. She was being systematically weakened. Made to appear terminal. Made to approach death slowly enough that no one would question inevitability. 3 months. A deadline not dictated by biology, but by design. On the 12th night of her employment, Mira stood alone in the dim hallway outside Alina's room. Rain streaked against the tall windows. Thunder rolled in the distance. Inside, the nurse prepared another clear injection. Mira watched the syringe fill. Her heart pounded in her ears. If she was wrong, intervening would cost her everything again. If she was right, staying silent would cost a girl her life. As the nurse approached the bedside, Mira stepped forward. "Let me assist," she said calmly. The nurse's eyes flickered, just for a second. Fear, and in that fleeting expression, Mira found confirmation. Time was running out, and the truth was far more dangerous than any diagnosis. Part 2. The storm that night felt almost theatrical, as if the sky itself had chosen sides. Lightning tore across the horizon, illuminating the vast silhouette of the Volkov mansion perched above the restless sea. Rain battered the windows in relentless waves. Inside, however, the true storm was unfolding in silence. Mira stood in the dim corridor outside Alina's room, watching the nurse prepare the syringe. Clear liquid, measured precisely, unmarked beyond a small coded label. The nurse tapped the syringe twice, expelled a thin stream of fluid into the air, and turned toward the bedroom. "Let me assist," Mira said, her voice steady. The nurse stiffened. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Volkov asked for closer observation tonight." Another lie. But this time, the nurse did not argue immediately. Her eyes darted toward the hallway camera, then back to Mira. "Fine," she said at last, handing over the syringe. Mira held it between her fingers. She had administered thousands of injections in her previous life. Her hands remembered what her current job title tried to erase. She stepped into Alina's room. The girl lay half awake, her breathing shallow but even. Thunder rolled in the distance. Mira bent close to her ear. "I'm not giving this to you," she whispered. Alina's eyelids fluttered slightly. Mira straightened and walked out, not toward the bedside, but down the long corridor, past paintings and sculptures, past closed doors and shadowed corners, until she reached the study. She didn't knock twice. She entered. Armen Volkov stood by his desk, reviewing documents beneath a green-shaded lamp. The storm's light flashed across his sharp features. His expression hardened instantly. "What is it?" Mira placed the syringe on his desk. Silence stretched. "That injection," she said quietly, "will not treat your daughter's cancer." His jaw tightened. "You're overstepping. It's tacrolimus, in a dosage inappropriate for lymphoma. It suppresses immune response to the point of collapse." He stared at her, disbelief shifting slowly into irritation. "You are a maid. I was a clinical pharmacologist." The words landed heavily. For a moment, neither moved. Then she continued. "I have reviewed the disposal logs. Compared dosages. Studied her blood work when left unattended. Her white cell suppression does not correlate with chemotherapy cycles alone. It correlates with this." She tapped the syringe gently. Armen's gaze flickered to it, just briefly, and that was enough for her to see uncertainty crack through his certainty. "You think I would allow someone to harm my own child?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "I think," Mira replied carefully, "that someone is counting on you trusting the wrong people." Thunder exploded overhead. Armen walked around the desk slowly, like a man circling a threat. "Explain," he demanded. "She may have lymphoma," Mira said. "But not stage 4, not terminal. The biopsy should be re-evaluated independently. Immediately." His face drained of color. "You're gambling with hope," he whispered. "I'm gambling with truth." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then something shifted behind his eyes, not anger, not pride. Fear. He grabbed the phone. Within 40 minutes, arrangements were underway. No announcements. No explanations to the existing medical team. A private medevac helicopter arrived under the cover of storm and darkness. Alina was transported to a secure facility under a different name. New oncologists. Fresh biopsies. Independent pathology. Mira was not allowed inside the examination wing, but Armen refused to send her away. She waited in a sterile corridor under harsh white lighting, hands clasped tightly. 48 hours later, the results came. Armen emerged from the consultation room looking like a man who had seen both heaven and hell in the span of minutes. "It's early stage," he said hoarsely. Mira exhaled without realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Highly treatable, excellent prognosis with proper protocol." The words hung in the air like sunrise breaking through months of darkness. Alina was not dying. She had been made to look like she was. The hospital launched an immediate review of prior reports. Within days, evidence surfaced, altered pathology slides, falsified staging assessments, financial transfers to offshore accounts linked to the original oncologist. But the most devastating revelation came from forensic financial tracing. A senior executive within Volkov Industries, Armen's longtime business partner, Victor Karolin, had been quietly acquiring leverage across the company. Insurance policies, contingency contracts, pressure points. If Alina had died before turning 18, the emotional devastation could have destabilized Armen's leadership. Share prices would plummet, control structures would fracture, Karolin would step in as stabilizer. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Kill the heir slowly, break the father completely, take the empire. Arrests followed swiftly. The nurse, the oncologist, financial intermediaries. Karolin himself attempted to flee the country but was detained before departure. When Armen returned home, the mansion no longer felt silent. It felt ashamed. He walked through halls that had unknowingly sheltered deception. Staff avoided his gaze, uncertain of what he knew, what he suspected. But his first stop was Alina's new recovery suite, temporarily arranged within a trusted medical facility wing of the estate. She looked different already, still pale, still weak, but not fading. "Papa," she whispered when he entered. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside her bed. "I failed you," he said. Her hand, fragile but warm, touched his cheek. "You were scared." "Yes," he admitted. "And blind." Mira stood near the window, watching quietly. For the first time since she had arrived, Armin looked at her not as staff, but as the reason his daughter was breathing. Weeks passed. Proper chemotherapy began under strict supervision. Immune levels stabilized. Appetite returned slowly. Strength crept back into Alina's limbs. She began sitting up without assistance. Then walking short distances in the garden. The mansion changed with her recovery. Windows were opened more often. Music returned to the piano room, tentative at first, then confident. Staff no longer whispered. On a bright afternoon nearly 3 months after that stormy night, the deadline that once loomed like a sentence, Alina stood in the garden under strings of golden lights celebrating her 18th birthday. Her hair was short but growing. Her smile was real. Guests were few and carefully chosen. No press. No spectacle. Just survival. Armin raised a glass, his voice steady but thick with emotion. To truth, he said simply. Later that evening, he found Mira near the gates. She was holding a small suitcase. You're leaving, he said. My work here is done. He studied her face. You could have exposed everything anonymously. She shook her head. Without proof, power buries truth. It needed precision. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside were legal documents restoring her medical license. Full funding for an independent clinical ethics foundation, chaired by her. I had your case reopened, he said quietly. You were right back then. They silenced you. She looked at him, genuinely surprised. You didn't have to do that. Yes, he said. I did. Behind them, laughter drifted from the garden, Alina's voice clear and alive. Mira closed the suitcase slowly. Your daughter is strong, she said. But she'll need you present. Not just powerful. Armin nodded. I know. She hesitated, then asked softly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't noticed? He looked toward the sea, calm now under moonlight. Every minute. She offered a faint smile. Then don't waste the minutes you have. As she walked toward the waiting car, Armin felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not control, not dominance, gratitude. Behind him, Alina ran barefoot across the lawn despite staff protests, laughter spilling freely into the night air. 3 months ago, that sound had felt temporary. Now it felt infinite, and for the first time in his life, Armin Volkov understood something no business conquest had ever taught him. Power could buy silence, it could buy loyalty, it could buy influence, but it could never buy the truth. That required courage, and sometimes, it arrived dressed as a maid.